People often ask the question, why is neuroscience important for coaches and coaching? Well, in part, it's just a propositional view that I have, which is if we're going to develop a profession which is a knowledge-based profession, it will be able to change and adapt and grow as knowledge systematically grows in a way that if it's just a practice-based profession, we won't be able to do that. Because in practice-based professions, all you can get is one person says, well, I do it this way, another person says, I do it this way, this works for me, that works for me. But you can't get underneath that to have a really informed debate. Whereas if you've got a knowledge-based profession, what we know in the West is that the accumulation of knowledge, which is tested and tried, and you've got an experimental base to it, when you take that into the applied field, you can begin to develop the methods by which that knowledge is used. And so what we are very much at the beginning of in applied neuroscience, which is my particular fascination, is how to take the knowledge that's coming from neuroscience labs around the world and turn that into method and technique and practice, which is of value to coaches. Let me give you an example. We now understand that the whole of the human system is driven by the emotional processes that are in the central part of the brain. It is the emotions that create the energy pathways and the energy flow inside the brain, and that nothing happens in the brain without it being attached at some level to the emotional system. Now, that shifts us hugely away from the Western mind-body dilemma that Descartes first introduced, though I think Descartes would be horrified about the way mind and body got split. He was struggling to define how the whole of the human system worked and was beginning to make the early propositions for what were experimental science, experimental philosophy, as it was called at the time. But we did get stuck in the 19th and 20th centuries with the idea that mind and body were somehow different, and what we were really controlled by was the capacity to think, that mind was more important than body. And so we adopted a position in which we started to ignore what our bodies told us or what our feelings told us in favor of some kind of control mechanism, which was cognitive. And what the 21st century is telling us is, come on, we've got to reintegrate our understanding of mind and body so that we're in touch with both. And now that we know that all information is processed in the first place through the emotional structures of the brain, and it's that gives meaning to anything that we can give meaning to, that is the beginnings of a big restatement of how it is that we create relationship. In organizations, between ourselves emotionally and privately, it's a big restatement of what the mechanisms might be that we as coaches ought to understand in order that we can read situations within the individual and within the organization very much more effectively.